It's the Metro on WDET. I'm Tia Graham. 100 years ago, the world was changing and ushering in new ways of living. The first transatlantic phone call from London to New York was made. Ford Motor Company became one of the first companies to implement the 40-hour work week. And the National Hockey League approved a new franchise team in Detroit. The Red Wings is one of the original 6-member leagues. The Red Wings are 11-time Stanley Cup champions, and we have Helene St. James here, who's been covering the Red Wings for the Detroit Free Press since 1996. She's the author of multiple books on the Red Wings, including the franchise, Detroit Red Wings, A Curated History of Hockeytown. Helene, thanks for joining us on the Metro. Hello? Hi, are you there?
Yeah.
How are you today?
Good. Very good. Thank you. How are you?
Doing really, really well. So I do want to start our conversation with Morning Edition's Pat Batchelor, a friend of yours. Of course, you've spoken with him multiple times, talking about one of his favorite memories being a lifelong Red Wings fan.
I would have to say when they won the Stanley Cup in 1997. I mean, it had been so long. I had never seen them win a Stanley Cup in my lifetime. Just the exhilaration of finally getting to that round and lifting the cup, just was a great feeling all the way around.
So, Helene, let's just jump right in. Based on your work and the books you've written, what stands out to you immediately about the Red Wings over the years?
Well, it's definitely that 1997 team, and it's funny because Kirk Mulvey sits up in the Red Wings press box, and we talk about the old times all the time, and he will still say he believes the 1997 team could beat the 2002 Red Wings. The emotional impact of when they won the Cup in 1997 is just so incredible. As good as the team was in 2002, I think the franchise bringing that cup back home in 1997 is a memory we will all cherish.
And we actually do have a clip of that, which I was so, taken away by how excited it just sounded in that moment when they won. Here is Darren McCarty scoring that winning goal.
Detroit again there, even though there was an odd man rush coming. Dumped back in as Nicholas Lidstrom again blocked it.
That was Lidstrom with the stick. What a stick he's got.
He was having a great final, as good as they thought he would be. Darren McCarty comes back with Neiman in front of him. McCarty draws. McCarty in. McCarty scores! A magnificent goal! Darren McCarty!
And Helene, just hearing that call, can you just walk us through that moment? Because I know you were there, you're covering it. What was it like?
It was incredible, and it was so perfect that it was on home ice. Yeah. But for me, it all, really began with March 26, 1997, the fights against the Colorado Avalanche. I think that is what united the team. And then they were a team of destiny after that. And it's just amazing how everything comes together. And, could you have asked for any better picture than Steve Yzerman lifting the cup with his, with his gap-toothed smile, because he had to have a crown replaced and he hadn't made it back to the dentist. So he's always like, I look like a hillbilly in that picture. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it was just, it's such a perfect hockey picture, right? And, it encapsulates the Red Wings perfectly.
So speaking of their winning time, that's 1997. So many folks here at WDET, Pat Batchelor, Adam Fox. Even some of the other coworkers here, Matt Trevethan as well, all talked about that 97 year. But I do want to go back to the Dead Wings era for a moment. The Detroit Red Wings from roughly 1967 to 1983. They weren't really good at all. So if you could go through. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, they were terrible. And, and part of that was, unfortunately, Ted Lindsay transitioning into the front office and nobody really knowing what they were doing. And the best thing Bruce Norris did was sell the team to Mr. and Mrs. Ilitch. And I will die on this hill that Marguerite Norris belongs in the Hockey Hall of Fame over her brother, because that was who her dad named to take over the team when he died in 1952. And they won 2 more cups under her. And then Bruce ousted her in 1955. And the Wings did not recover until the Ilitches bought the team in 1992. And then the best thing they did was hire Jimmy DeVillano. The best thing he did was draft Steve Eisenman in 1983. And, I tell people these days who are like, when are they going to win again? Well, it took them 14 years after drafting Steve to win. And that was with 26 teams and no salary cap. It's incredibly hard. But yeah, the 1970s were awful. The 1980s were pretty fun. And then the 1990s were just awesome.
And Helene, for folks who don't know or understand the significance of the octopus being thrown onto the ice, what is the history behind that? I got into it a little bit with Pat Batchelor, but I'd love to hear it from you.
Well, that's, you brought it up at the start of the show, original 6 teams. You used to only have to win 8 games, 8 tentacles on an octopus. Nowadays you have to win 16 games to win the Stanley Cup. But that's where the tradition dates from, is that the poor little octopus had 8 tentacles, and that was all it took back in the days of the original 6 to win the Stanley Cup.
Which is such a cool little holdover from the old days of the league. But Helene, for me, I remember the 2002 and 2008 Stanley Cups wins, mainly the 2008. What can be said about those winning teams? What made them so special, especially as you're covering that era?
Well, they drafted incredibly well. Those teams were led by Henrik Zetterberg and Pavel Datsyuk, who were 6th and 7th round picks, and that was back before now all teams have eyes everywhere in the world. Back then, the Red Wings were one of the few teams that had scouts inside Russia, and they only got one look at Pavel Datsyuk, and they took him late in the 6th round, but that's who came over and made a difference. The Wings thought they were going to go into a rebuild before then, but then they saw those guys come over and they took over, leading the team, and that's what made all the difference for the 2008 team.
And just thinking about that time once again, it was just an amazing time. I remember just that Hockey Town moniker really just took hold. We're going to get into Hockey Town a little bit more because I want you to respond to something that Pat Batchelor said. But when we think about hockey in Detroit in general, and this region in general, do we still hold that? Can we still put that on our heads? Like, hey, Detroit is still Hockey Town.
I think so, absolutely. It never fails to amaze me whenever I write about any of the old timers, and they just had a fan celebration earlier this month. Sergei Fedorov was in town, Nicholas Lidstrom was in town, but even going beyond that, the amount of emails I get about people having a personal relationship memory with Gordie Howe, Ted Lindsay, I think that's what sets this franchise apart, is that people have such a personal connection with it, and that's what matters.
Because oftentimes, folks may think about Gordie Howe Bridge and think, why would they name it after Gordie? But he meant so much to the city and so much to the fans here. He was a special, particular person. If you could just go into Gordie Howe, because I know one of the guests that I spoke with that's going to be featured in our next segment about a new exhibition headed to the Detroit Historical Museum, he talked about how he was able to connect with Gordie Howe as a young man, as an early hockey fan. So talk about the impact that Gordie Howe had on so many Detroiters, especially when we talk about just being sports fans.
I think we should open that bridge by firing pucks from each side of the river, first of all. But I think also just because, Mark Howe, to me, puts it best, his own son, is that he was an even better human being than he was a hockey player, and he was a phenomenal hockey player, but he was so kind, he was so humble. He always, Mark has told me many times he and his siblings used to know if they went out with their mom and dad and somebody recognized Gordie, that they would just go sit somewhere by themselves for an hour while the dad signed all the autographs. I think that's what sets Gordie apart, is that he was so accessible to everyone. And that's all those guys back then were.
This is amazing to think about, just to be able to touch your favorite, or just to walk up and talk to your favorite athlete off the ice is absolutely amazing. And our idols often are on the ice, really are special to a lot of people here in the city of Detroit. So it hurts when they leave. Now, Fedorov went to the Anaheim Ducks in 2003, and Detroiters were mad. His jersey was finally retired this year. Why did it take so long?
Yeah, it was very unfortunate. And Sergei himself has said, the best years of his career were in Detroit. And I mean, relations really thawed in 2015 when he and Nicholas Lidstrom, both draft picks, both selected by the Red Wings in the 1989 draft, were inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame, rightfully so. I mean, Fedorov is a phenomenal player, and I think it's very unfortunate he left the team. I don't doubt they would have won at least one more cup, if not two, if he and Lidstrom had stayed on to play into their retirement in 2012. And when Fedorov was in town earlier this season, I looked at him and thought, wow, that guy could still play 10, 15 minutes for the team. He still just looks in such good shape, amazing. And we were so spoiled by how much talent there was on the team back then.
And that's just something to think about. Like you said, he can still lace up right now and hit the ice. That's amazing to think about. And we're talking about the Detroit Red Wings hockey team. They're commemorating 100 years as a franchise. Our guest is Detroit Free Press sports writer and author Helene St. James. Now, Helene, what is the history of Hockeytown, and how does it connect so closely to the city of Detroit?
Yeah, well, that franchise arrived here. Technically, it was November 1926. So I'm not going to fault the Red Wings for, fiddling a little bit there with what actually is 100 years, because by my math, it's next year. But and they were the Falcons, and in 1932, James E. Norris bought the team and renamed them the Red Wings, and the best hire he made was hiring Jack Adams, who was just year to year. And, things were so different back then. And they got Gordie Howe and Ted Lindsay and Sid Abel and Terry Sawchuk and went on a heck of a winning spree starting in the 1930s and then again in the 1950s. So it's an incredible franchise, but it really started in 1932 when James Norris bought the team.
Wow. So the Hockeytown, and it just means something to the city. It's been around for so long, 1932, like you said. So that is a moniker that Detroit can proudly hold over its head. Helene, talk about how the Red Wings represent the city that they do call home. Detroit takes pride in being this gritty place, and so many players, even throughout, maybe it's the Lions, maybe even the Tigers or the Pistons, so many people love Detroit, and they love playing for Detroit. So, from your experience, from your opinion, why do you think that is?
No, that's a great question. And I think it's because so many of the players, at least in hockey, they stick around after they're done playing. Like they love living in this area, and they love, I always tell people, like, goodness, if you could only just have everybody who sits up in the press box or the manager's suite, Steve Yzerman, Chris Draper, Kirk Maltby, Darren McCarty, come and lace them up. It means a great deal to players to play for this franchise, and they love sticking around afterwards and being a part of transitioning the team into more success.
Yeah, it's just great to see how so many players, like you said, they stay and they become a part of the greater, Metro Detroit community, and you can see them around, they're shopping, they're just a part of Michigan. They're Michiganders, they're Detroiters now due to playing in the city. And I love to see that so many people, they come here and they stay because they just love the vibes and the feelings of being in Metro Detroit. But I do want to get to this other clip that we have of Pat Batchelor talking about the Red Wings and his thoughts on whether or not Hockeytown can really be claimed here in the city of Detroit.
It can be. I mean, we've seen the support the Red Wings draw when they're really good. I mean, it's been a long time since they've been in the playoffs. They're in the midst of their longest playoff drought in team history, longer even than the Dead Wings era back from my childhood. If they ever get to the point where they can compete for Stanley Cups again, yeah, I think it certainly could be. They certainly could reclaim Hockeytown. But it's so difficult anymore because you've got 32 teams now. They've expanded into markets that you wouldn't normally expect them to. I mean, when Florida teams are winning Stanley Cups and a Canadian team hasn't won in over 30 years, you see the difficulty involved.
And Helene, you talked a little bit earlier about the difficulty in rebuilding. You said it took 14 years for the Red Wings to rebuild when they did in order to just get you another Stanley Cup. So let's just talk about right now, reliving those glory days a little bit. Is this still Hockeytown? You did answer that a little bit. But what difficulty is involved to get back to some of those sort of glory days here in Detroit?
Well, I'll say on a broad perspective, I think very much it is Hockeytown because Detroit and Metro Detroit has a great youth hockey program. I don't know that there's an area maybe outside of Minnesota that has more passion for youth hockey. So, to me that defines it. That defines it. But then with specific to the Red Wings, it's incredibly hard, and the Wings have not had any luck in the draft lottery. I think Steve Yzerman has done a great job drafting. I get why fans are frustrated. Yeah. And, nobody wants to hear, please be patient as a marketing slogan. But, they're doing very well this season. They really are.
And even when folks, because hardcore fans, I talk to hardcore fans around here often, and they say, they start off doing well in the beginning of the season, but then they just end poorly. What should fans expect from this team?
Well, I think they'll be competitive all along, and the best thing Steve Yzerman has done the past few years is hire Todd McLellan, bringing him in. It's funny. So the NHL has a 3-day Christmas break, and the 24th, 25th, 26th. And last December 26th, I was thinking, great, I'm just going to stay home and watch Die Hard movies all day. And 12:15.
Because they are Christmas movies.
Yes, they are Christmas movies, yes. And Steve announced, hey, they've made a change in coaching. It was needed, but Todd McLellan has transformed this team, and he gets frustrated at times. We all do. With why do they suddenly lose 5-0 to the Islanders or blow a 3-0 lead against the Buffalo Sabres and lose at home in overtime? But overall, considering it's basically a 1.5 line team, he's done a terrific job with what he has.
And Helene, you've been with the Red Wings and following and covering the Red Wings since 1996. You've written multiple books about the Red Wings and their history. Our next conversation is going to include a new exhibition that's celebrating 100 years of the Red Wings franchise. And from your perspective and the things that you've been able to learn and uncover about the Red Wings, what are some things that you will put into a museum if you were one of the curators?
Well, absolutely. Their arrival in 1926, and they didn't even play at Olympia Stadium for several months because it was still being built. They played their first home games in Windsor. I mean, the franchise's history is just incredible, and how they got Gordie Howe and Ted Lindsay and all those guys. And, the interruption with World War II and such, and then James Norris turning the franchise over to Marguerite. She is the first woman who ever got her name on the Stanley Cup. That's pretty incredible, right? And then how it sunk into disrepair in the 1970s, and then when the Ilitches bought it, to me, much as Marguerite is an unspoken hero, Marian Ilitch too, because she's the one. Mike Ilitch. So here's something fun. Mike Ilitch at the 1983 draft tried his best to bribe the New York Islanders into giving the Red Wings Pat LaFontaine. And Marian Ilitch was the one who said to her husband, let Jimmy D do his job. So yes, tip our hats to Marian Ilitch for why Steve Yzerman has been a lifelong, for most part, Red Wing.
Which, just the hidden women behind some of these stories. I love that so much. Helene, just thinking about the Red Wings, of course, do you think they have the talent they need to make a deep run in the playoffs? A lot of fans want to know if they should get ready to sit in those seats at LCA to watch them play a little bit longer this year.
I do think they have the talent to make the playoffs. Once you get into the playoffs, so much of it just comes down to goaltending and health. And, so if the Wings get lucky there, I think they absolutely could win a round or two. But I do think that they can make it into the playoffs this year. I do think that drought will end this in 2026.
I think we're all rooting for that. We're really rooting for that. I've recently become a fan, so I've watched a lot more games than I used to in the past. It was very, very fun. It's amazing. It's exhilarating to watch. So I'm hoping that in 2026 we can see some winning happening. Helene St. James has been covering the Red Wings for the Detroit Free Press since 1996. She is also the author of 3 books covering the Detroit Red Wings history. I want to say, Helene, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro and letting us know a little bit more about this amazing history that the Detroit Red Wings have here in Detroit.
My pleasure. Anytime. Happy to be on.
Coming up, a new exhibition at Detroit Historical Museum celebrates 100 years of Red Wing hockey in Detroit. You all stay right there. This is the Metro.